Eric Thompson leaned back in his office chair, the hum of Denver's downtown fading as he stared at his laptop screen. A photo of a cozy chalet nestled in the snowy peaks of Colorado's Rocky Mountains glowed before him. Pine trees framed the wooden cabin, their branches dusted with fresh powder, promising the kind of quiet he craved. At 35, Eric was a man of simple tastes. Give him a good book, a crackling fire, and a starry sky, and he was content. This weekend, he thought, would be perfect. Just him and his wife, Sophia, unplugging from the world. Sophia, though, was a different story. At 33, she was a whirlwind of energy, her laughter filling rooms and her social calendar always brimming. Where Eric savored solitude, Sophia thrived in crowds, her hazel eyes sparkling when she was surrounded by friends. Their differences had always balanced each other. His calm grounded her vibrance, and her warmth pulled him out of his shell. They'd been married for 7 years, and despite the occasional clash, their love felt solid. Or so Eric believed. The idea for the mountain getaway had been Sophia's, which surprised him. "Let's escape," she'd said one evening, her voice soft as she curled up on their couch, her dark hair spilling over her shoulders. No phones, no work, just us, the mountains, and maybe a bottle of wine. Eric's heart had lifted at the thought. Life had been hectic lately. His tech job demanded long hours, and Sophia's event planning business kept her buzzing from one gala to the next. A weekend alone, he thought, could be the reset they needed. He booked the chalet the next day, a rustic retreat near Breckenridge, far from cell service and city noise. Eric pictured them hiking snow-dusted trails, cooking dinner together, and falling asleep to the sound of wind rustling through the pines. It was the kind of intimacy they hadn't had in months, and he felt a flicker of excitement he hadn't realized he'd missed. But 2 nights ago, over dinner, Sophia dropped a bombshell. She was chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, her knife moving with practiced ease, when she said, almost too casually, "Oh, by the way, I was thinking Leah could join us for the trip." Eric froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Leah Carter, Sophia's best friend from college, was a force of nature, bold, witty, and always the loudest laugh in the room. At 34, Leah ran a boutique PR firm and had a knack for turning any gathering into a party. "Leah," Eric repeated, trying to keep his tone neutral. "I thought this was supposed to be, just us." Sophia glanced up, her smile disarming. "I know, babe, but Leah's been going through a rough patch. She could use a break, and it'll be fun. You like her, don't you?" Her eyes held that playful glint Eric could never resist. But this time, it didn't quite work. He did like Leah. She was charming, quick with a joke, and always kind to him. But this trip was meant to be theirs, a chance to reconnect without distractions. He set his fork down, choosing his words carefully. "It's not that I don't like her. I was looking forward to some time alone. We haven't had that in a while." Sophia's expression softened, and she reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I get it, Eric, and we'll still have our moments, I promise. Leah won't stay the whole time. She's just tagging along for a couple of days. Please." Her voice was warm, coaxing, and Eric felt his resolve waver. He knew how much Leah meant to Sophia. They'd been inseparable in college, sharing late-night study sessions and wild adventures. Saying no felt like denying Sophia a piece of herself. "All right," he said finally, forcing a smile. "If it means that much to you." Sophia beamed, leaning over to kiss his cheek, and the conversation shifted to packing lists and travel plans. But as Eric cleared the dishes later, a quiet unease settled in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that this trip, which he'd imagined as a private escape, was already slipping out of his control. The next morning, Eric double-checked the chalet's booking, ensuring the hot tub was ready and the firewood stocked. He tried to focus on the excitement, the crisp mountain air, the chance to see Sophia relaxed and happy. But Leah's presence loomed in his mind, a variable he hadn't planned for. He told himself he was overthinking it. Leah was fun, and maybe her energy would liven things up. Still, as he zipped his duffel bag and glanced at Sophia humming in the next room, a question lingered. Why did this feel like more than just a friendly favor? As I loaded the car for the drive to Breckenridge, Sophia's laughter filled the air, her excitement contagious. Eric pushed his doubts aside, determined to make the weekend special. The mountains awaited, and with them, a chance to rediscover the spark that had always kept them together. Or so he hoped. The chalet sat like a jewel against the rugged backdrop of Breckenridge's snow-capped peaks. Its cedar walls glowed golden in the late afternoon sun, and the scent of pine needles hung heavy in the crisp mountain air. Eric stepped out of the car, his boots crunching on the frosty gravel, and took it all in. Tall evergreens stretched toward a sky streaked with pink and orange, and the distant hum of a frozen creek promised the kind of peace he'd been craving. This, he thought, was exactly what he'd pictured, a sanctuary for him and Sophia to rediscover each other. Inside, the chalet was as charming as the photos promised. A stone fireplace dominated the living room, flanked by plaid armchairs and a worn leather couch. Exposed beams crisscrossed the ceiling, and the faint smell of wood smoke lingered, warm and inviting. Sophia dropped her bag by the door and spun around, her dark hair catching the light. "Eric, this place is perfect," she said, her voice bright with excitement. She kicked off her boots and padded across the hardwood floor, already exploring the kitchen. Eric smiled, his earlier unease softening. Maybe this weekend would be everything he'd hoped. But then came the sound of tires on gravel. Leah's red SUV pulled up, and before Eric could set down his duffel, she burst through the door like a gust of wind. "Well, hello, Mountain Paradise," Leah called, her voice echoing off the walls. At 34, she was all confidence, blonde curls bouncing, green eyes sharp with mischief. She wore a puffy jacket and carried a bottle of red wine, which she thrust toward Sophia with a grin. "Brought the essentials." Sophia laughed, pulling Leah into a hug that lasted a beat too long. Eric watched, his smile tightening. He liked Leah's energy, but her arrival shifted the air, like a radio dial tuned to a louder station. "Good to see you, Leah," he said, stepping forward to take her bag. "Hope the drive wasn't too bad." "Piece of cake," Leah replied, winking, "though I nearly got lost chasing a deer down some back road. This place is wild." She peeled off her jacket, revealing a sweater that clung to her frame, and immediately started chatting with Sophia about the chalet's quirks. The creaky stairs, the clawfoot tub. Eric busied himself unpacking groceries, tried to ignore the way their laughter filled the space, leaving little room for him. As evening settled, the three of them gathered in the kitchen to prepare dinner. Sophia and Leah took charge, chopping vegetables and teasing each other about old college cooking disasters. "Remember that time we burned the lasagna?" Leah said, nudging Sophia. The fire alarm wouldn't shut up. Sophia giggled, her cheeks flushed. "We had to bribe the RA with cookies to keep it quiet." Their eyes met, sparkling with shared history, and Eric felt a pang. He'd heard some of these stories, but seeing Sophia, so animated, so unguarded, stirred something in him. She seemed younger, lighter, like the woman he'd met a decade ago at a friend barbecue. He wanted to join in, to be part of that glow, but their rhythm was too tight, their inside jokes a language he didn't speak. "Need a hand?" Eric offered, leaning against the counter. Sophia glanced over, her smile softening. "We got this, babe. Why don't you start the fire? It's getting chilly." Her tone was kind, but it felt like a polite dismissal. Eric nodded, grabbing a stack of logs from the hearth. As he knelt by the fireplace, the crackle of kindling drowned out their voices, but he could still hear their muffled giggles, sharp and exclusive. Dinner was simple but hearty. Roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, and a salad tossed with Leah's secret vinaigrette. They sat at a rustic oak table, the fireplace casting a warm glow across their faces. Leah raised her wine glass, her eyes glinting. "To new beginnings," she said, her voice smooth but carrying an edge that made Eric pause. "Tonight's we'll never forget." Sophia clinked her glass against Leah's, her smile wide. "To that," she echoed. Eric joined the toast, but the words stuck in his mind. New beginnings? What did that mean? He took a sip of wine, its bitterness lingering on his tongue. The conversation flowed, dominated by Leah's stories, her recent client drama, a chaotic trip to Vegas. Sophia hung on every word, her laughter quick and bright. Eric tried to chime in, mentioning a hiking trail he'd read about, but the topic fizzled, overtaken by another of Leah's anecdotes. As the night deepened, the mountain air grew sharp, seeping through the chalet's windows. Sophia suggested moving to the living room, where they draped blankets over the couch and fed the fire. Leah sprawled across one end, her legs tucked under her, while Sophia sat close, their shoulders brushing. Eric settled opposite, watching the flames dance. Liao launched into a story about a music festival she and Sophia had crashed in college, their eyes locking as they recounted sneaking past security. "We were unstoppable," Liao said, her voice low, almost intimate. Sophia's gaze lingered on Liao, her expression soft. "We still are," she murmured, and something in her tone, a quiet intensity, made Eric's stomach tighten. He shifted, the blanket slipping from his knees. Was he imagining it, or was there a current between them, something unspoken but heavy? He tried to brush it off. They were friends, close friends, and he was reading too much into it. But as Leah's hand grazed Sophia's arm, a casual touch that lasted a fraction too long, doubt crept in like the cold. The fire crackled, its warmth no match for the chill settling in Eric's chest. He wanted to believe this was just a weekend among friends, that Sophia's glow was just nostalgia. But the way her eyes followed Leah, the way their laughter wove together, felt like a thread he couldn't quite grasp. As the night stretched on, Eric sat quietly, the chalet's cozy walls closing in, and wondered if the peace he'd come for was already out of reach. The chalet's warmth had faded into a biting chill as midnight crept over the mountains. The fire in the living room had dwindled to embers, casting faint, flickering shadows across the wooden walls. Eric lay on the edge of the oversized bed in the master bedroom, the mattress creaking under his weight. The room smelled of pine and wax from a candle Sophia had lit earlier, its glow long since extinguished. Outside, the wind howled through the Breckenridge pines, a low moan that mirrored the unease twisting in Eric's gut. Sophia's suggestion had caught him off guard. "It's freezing," she'd said an hour ago, her voice light as she tossed extra blankets onto the bed. "The main bedroom's huge. Why don't we all crash here? It'll be like a slumber party." Her hazel eyes sparkled with that familiar charm, and Leah had chimed in, laughing. "I'm game. It's too cold for privacy anyway." Eric had raised an eyebrow, the idea striking him as odd. Sharing a bed with his wife's friend wasn't what he'd envisioned for their romantic getaway. But he didn't want to seem uptight, not when Sophia looked so eager. "Sure," he'd said, forcing a chuckle, "if you two are cool with it." Now, lying in the middle of the bed, Eric felt anything but cool. Sophia was on his left, her breathing soft but not quite steady, as if she were hovering on the edge of sleep. Liao was on his right, her presence a restless energy, her occasional shifts rustling the sheets. The darkness pressed in, heavy with the scent of wool blankets and the faint crackle of the dying fire downstairs. Eric stared at the ceiling, its beams barely visible, and tried to quiet his mind. He told himself it was just one night, just a quirky moment among friends. But the memory of Sophia and Leah's earlier laughter, their shared glances over dinner, gnawed at him. Then he heard it, a whisper, soft as the wind but unmistakable. It came from Leah's side, followed by a muffled giggle from Sophia. Eric's heart thudded. He kept still, eyes half open, letting the darkness sharpen his senses. The whispers continued, low and intimate, punctuated by another quiet laugh. It wasn't the playful banter of old college stories. This was something private, something meant to stay hidden. His chest tightened, a mix of curiosity and dread pooling inside him. He shifted slightly, hoping to catch their words, but the whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by a tense silence. Eric waited, the seconds stretching like hours. Then Leah's voice, barely audible, broke through. "You're sure he's asleep?" she murmured. Sophia's reply was too soft to make out, but the tone, cautious, almost conspiratorial, sent a chill down Eric's spine. He clenched his jaw, fighting the urge to sit up and demand answers. Instead, he let his breathing slow, feigning sleep, and listened as the whispers resumed, too faint to decipher, but laced with an intimacy that felt like a betrayal. Minutes passed, or maybe hours, time blurred in the dark. The whispers grew sporadic, interspersed with more giggles, each one a needle in Eric's resolve. He tried to rationalize it. They were best friends, catching up on years of memories. But the way Sophia had leaned into Leah's stories earlier, the way their hands had brushed during dinner, replayed in his mind. And that toast, to new beginnings, echoed like a warning he hadn't heeded. Finally, he couldn't take it anymore. He turned slightly, his voice cutting through the darkness, calm but edged with doubt. "What are you two whispering about?" The words hung in the air, and the room went still. He felt Sophia tense beside him, her breath catching. Leah let out a short, nervous laugh, the kind that tried to mask something. "Oh, nothing, Eric," Sophia said quickly, her voice too bright, like she was forcing cheer. "Just some silly college stuff. You were sleeping so well, we didn't want to wake you." Her hand reached for his arm, reassuring pat, but it felt rehearsed, hollow. "Yeah, just girl talk," Leah added, her tone breezy but not quite convincing. Eric opened his eyes fully, letting them adjust to the dim glow from the embers downstairs. He couldn't see their faces clearly, but he sensed their unease, the way they avoided looking at him. Something was off, and their rushed explanations only deepened his suspicion. "Really?" he said, keeping his voice even, because it didn't sound like nothing. He propped himself on one elbow, the mattress creaking under him. The silence that followed was thick, charged with unspoken truths. He waited, hoping one of them would crack, but neither spoke. Instead, he caught the faintest movement, Sophia's hand shifting toward Leah, a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed in the light. "I'm going to the couch," Eric said abruptly, his voice flat. He swung his legs over the bed's edge, grabbing a blanket from the footboard. Sophia's voice followed him, soft and pleading. "Eric, come on, it's freezing out there." "Stay. I'll be fine," he said, not turning back. His footsteps echoed on the hardwood as he crossed to the living room, the cold seeping through his socks. He tossed the blanket onto the couch and sank into it, staring at the glowing embers in the fireplace. The chalet, once a haven, now felt like a stage for a play he hadn't been invited to. His mind raced, piecing together the night. The looks, the whispers, the way Sophia's laughter had belonged to Leah, not him. As he pulled the blanket tighter, a single thought crystallized. Whatever was happening between Sophia and Leah, it wasn't just friendship. And whatever came next, he wasn't sure he was ready to face it. The wind howled outside, and Eric lay awake, the weight of the night pressing down, knowing the truth was closer than he wanted it to be. Morning light spilled through the chalet's frost-etched windows, painting the living room in shades of gold and gray. Eric hadn't slept. The couch, though soft, felt like a stone slab beneath him, and the blanket he'd pulled tight did little to ward off the cold, both from the mountain air and the betrayal simmering in his chest. The Breckenridge silence was broken only by the occasional creak of the cedar walls and the distant caw of a crow. Eric stared at the fireplace, its embers long dead, and replayed the night's events. The whispers, the giggles, Sophia's too quick excuses. His heart ached, but beneath the pain, a resolve was forming. He needed answers, and he needed them now. Footsteps stirred from the hallway. Sophia appeared first, wrapped in a wool robe, her dark hair tangled from sleep. Her hazel eyes, usually so warm, carried a guarded flicker as they met his. "Eric," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "You slept out here all night?" She lingered by the kitchen counter, fiddling with a mug, avoiding his gaze. Eric didn't answer right away. He sat up, the blanket falling to his lap, and studied her. The woman he'd loved for 7 years suddenly felt like a stranger. Leah followed, her blonde curls bouncing as she strode in with a confidence that bordered on defiance. "Morning, Eric," she said, her tone bright but tinged with something sharp, like she was testing the air. She wore a loose sweater and jeans, her green eyes scanning the room before settling on him. Unlike Sophia, she didn't shy away from his stare. Eric nodded curtly, his jaw tight. The chalet's cozy charm, its pine-scented air, its rustic beams, felt suffocating now, a backdrop to a truth he could no longer ignore. Breakfast was tense. They sat at the oak table, the clink of forks against plates deafening in the silence. Sophia pushed scrambled eggs around her plate, her movements mechanical. Leah sipped coffee, her casual demeanor a stark contrast to the storm brewing. Eric set his mug down, the thud echoing. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. "About last night. What was going on?" "Because I'm done with the nothing excuses." The air shifted, heavy with anticipation. Sophia's fork froze midair, and she glanced at Leah, a silent plea in her eyes. Leah set her coffee down, her lips curving into a small, almost relieved smile. "You're right, Eric," she said, her voice steady. "You deserve the truth." Sophia's head snapped toward her, panic flashing across her face. Leah, no, she started, but Leah raised a hand, cutting her off. We can't keep this up, Soph, Leah said, her tone softening but resolute. He knows something's wrong. She turned to Eric, her gaze unflinching. The truth is, Sophia and we've been more than friends for years. It started in college, before you two met, and it never really stopped. We didn't plan for it to happen, and we never wanted to hurt you. But what we have, it's not just friendship, it's love. The words hit Eric like a physical blow, stealing his breath. His world tilted, the chalet's walls seeming to close in. He looked at Sophia, waiting for her to deny it, to laugh it off as a misunderstanding. But she bowed her head, her hands trembling in her lap, her silence louder than any confession. The pain was sharp, a knife twisting in his chest, but it wasn't just betrayal. It was the realization that he'd been blind, piecing together clues he'd dismissed as paranoia. Why? He managed his voice hoarse. Why hide it? Why let me think? He stopped, the words choking him. Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look up. I didn't know how to tell you, she whispered. I thought I could keep it separate, live our life, and deal with this. I love you, Eric, but I love her too. I've been torn for so long. Eric's hands clenched into fists, not from anger, but from the effort to hold himself together. He wanted to shout, to demand how she could lie for years, but a new revelation stopped him cold. Leah leaned forward, her voice carrying a hint of defiance. There's something else, she said, her eyes locking onto his. I came here to force a choice. I told Sophia she had to tell you this weekend, or I would. I'm tired of hiding, Eric. I thought this trip would make her see we can't keep pretending. Eric's mind reeled. Leah's ultimatum was a twist he hadn't seen coming, a calculated move to push Sophia into a corner. He looked at Sophia, her face pale, her tears falling freely now. Is that true? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, a small, broken gesture. I didn't want to lose you, she said, but I didn't want to lose her either. The room spun. Eric stood, his chair scraping against the floor. So all of it, the looks, the whispers, the new beginnings toast, was about this. His voice rose, raw with hurt. You let me think I was imagining things, Sophia. And you, he turned to Leah, his eyes blazing. You orchestrated this to blow it all up. Leah didn't flinch. You deserve to know, she said simply. Sophia reached for his hand, but he pulled away, the touch burning. Eric, please, she begged, but he shook his head, his heart a tangle of disbelief and rage. I need air, he said, grabbing his coat. The chalet's door slammed behind him as he stepped into the snowy morning, the cold biting his face. The mountains loomed, indifferent to his shattered world. He didn't know what came next, but one thing was clear. The life he'd known was over. And as he stood there, the weight of Leah's words sank in. She'd forced the truth, but at what cost? Eric drove down the winding roads of Breckenridge, the chalet fading in his rearview mirror like a memory he was ready to leave behind. The snowy peaks of the Rockies loomed under a pale morning sky, their indifference a stark contrast to the storm of emotions churning inside him. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as Sophia's tearful confession and Leah's defiant truth echoed in his mind. The betrayal cut deep, but amid the pain, a clarity emerged. He deserved honesty, and he wouldn't let their deception define him. At 35, Eric was ready to reclaim his life. Back in Denver, the familiar hum of the city felt foreign. The apartment he'd shared with Sophia, once a haven, now seemed like a museum of a life that no longer existed. He moved methodically, packing a suitcase with essentials, clothes, books, a photo of his late father, and checked into a hotel. Sitting on the stiff mattress, he opened his laptop and typed an email to a divorce attorney recommended by a colleague. I need to discuss a separation, he wrote, his fingers steady despite the ache in his chest. The decision was painful but necessary. He wouldn't confront Sophia with anger. He'd let the law handle what came next. Days later, at a sleek downtown office, the attorney, a sharp woman named Karen, listened as Eric recounted the weekend. Her pen scratched notes, her expression calm but focused. Colorado's a no-fault divorce state, she explained, but financial misconduct can impact asset division. Did Sophia or Leah have access to joint accounts? Eric paused, a memory surfacing. Sophia had insisted on a shared savings account for emergencies, but he'd noticed odd withdrawals, weekend trips, hotel stays, always explained as client events for her business. Leah's name had appeared on a few receipts, tucked away in a drawer. "I'll need to check," Eric said, his voice low. Karen nodded. "Give me bank statements. If there's a pattern, we can argue mismanagement." Eric spent the next week combing through records, his tech skills proving useful. The evidence was damning. Thousands of dollars funneled to trips and gifts, often coinciding with Leah's visits. It wasn't revenge that drove him, it was justice. Sophia and Leah had built their secret on his trust, and he'd ensure they faced the consequences. The legal process was slow but deliberate. Eric's attorney presented the financial discrepancies to Sophia's lawyer, who offered a quick settlement to avoid a drawn-out case. Sophia agreed to relinquish their joint savings and the apartment, her signature shaky on the documents. Leah, named in the filings for her role in the expenditures, faced scrutiny at her PR firm when clients learned of her personal conduct. Whispers of their affair spread through Denver's tight-knit social circles, eroding the charm they'd relied on. Eric didn't gloat. Their isolation was punishment enough. With the divorce finalized, Eric moved to a small condo in Boulder, its windows framing the Flatiron's rugged silhouette. The change felt like a fresh start. He took up hiking, the trails a quiet space to process his grief. One evening, at a community center, he stumbled into a volunteer group aiding local shelters. Helping others, organizing food drives, mentoring kids, gave him a purpose he hadn't realized he'd lost. The pain of Sophia's betrayal lingered, but it no longer controlled him. Sophia and Leah, meanwhile, struggled. Their relationship, once a hidden spark, buckled under the weight of public judgment and financial strain. Sophia's event planning business took a hit as clients distanced themselves and Leah's firm downsized, her reputation tarnished. Eric heard through mutual friends that they'd moved to a smaller city, their bond fraying. He felt no satisfaction, only a quiet resolve. Their choices had built their consequences, just as his were building his future. Months later, Eric stood on a boulder trail, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. He thought of the chalet, of the night that had shattered his world. It had been a crucible, burning away illusions to reveal his strength. The moral was clear. Truth, however painful, was a foundation for growth. Lies, no matter how sweet, crumbled under scrutiny. Eric inhaled the crisp mountain air, his heart lighter. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he knew he'd face it with honesty, and that was enough. As he turned back toward home, a single thought anchored him. He was free, not just from Sophia and Leah, but from the fear of being less than he deserved. The mountains stood silent, witnesses to his rebirth, and Eric walked on, ready for whatever came next.